This afternoon, Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene made good on her threat to oust Republican Speaker Mike Johnson.
The form of the resolution is as follows. Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant. This is the uniparty for the American people watching.
Gentlelady will suspend. Order. Order.
Looked fun banging that gavel, didn't it? Things did not get better from there. After Greene introduced her motion, Republican Majority Leader Steve Scalise moved to table the motion, which would effectively kill it. And within about 40 seconds of the vote opening, it had the support to pass and then some. In the end, 163 Democrats, along with 196 Republicans, voted to save Mike Johnson's speakership. According to House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, it was the right thing for his caucus to do.
Our decision to stop Marjorie Taylor Greene from plunging the House of Representatives and the country into further chaos is rooted in our commitment to solve problems for everyday Americans in a bipartisan manner. We need more common sense and less chaos in Washington, D.C. Marjorie Taylor Greene and extreme MAGA Republicans are chaos agents. House Democrats are change agents.
Joining me now, NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor, who's been all over Capitol Hill covering the effort to oust Speaker Johnson. Sahil, first, just as someone who's been embedded in this story, what do you think of today's outcome?
Well, Chris, it was a rather extraordinary and somewhat theatrical series of events here. The outcome has not been in doubt. You know, it's been very clear for a while that Democrats would provide the votes to table this motion, essentially kill Marjorie Taylor Greene's effort to oust Mike Johnson. But it is also the first time in modern history we've seen a Speaker of the House have to rely on votes from the minority party to prevent, to save his job, to avoid himself getting overthrown. So that was notable, and that was ultimately why Marjorie Taylor Greene did this. She wanted to make a point that Mike Johnson cannot survive in that job without the support of Democrats. Now, technically, this wasn't a vote to overthrow. This is a vote to table, a vote to overthrow, and that distinction, it's parliamentary gibberish, but it was important to Democrats because they can go home and say they just prevented Marjorie Taylor Greene from getting her vote. That's very important because 163 Democrats effectively voted to save Mike Johnson, in this job, a man who they've described as an election denier, dangerous to democracy, who, earlier today they accused of scaremongering with this election bill, standing with a bunch of other election deniers as well. So what Democrats are trying to do here is present themselves as the adults in the room, to present themselves as team normal against a bunch of squabbling children and extremists, and that's the narrative that they hope to ride this fall, Chris. Yeah,
the other thing I would note here is that unlike McCarthy, Johnson clearly negotiated with them. When I was covering the McCarthy stuff and we were on air together, what was so clear is the Democrats just didn't trust the guy. And he also just never reached out. He never said, hey, look, they're going to try to come after me. Let's strike some kind of a deal. I don't know if there was an explicit deal between Johnson and Democrats, but what is clear is that there are open lines of communication and some sort of traditional and transactional kind of deal making happening.
Well, there's certainly no personal animosity to Mike Johnson the way there was to Kevin McCarthy, Chris, and that's for a whole bunch of reasons. But no, there was no explicit deal. We've talked to a lot of members about this. We've talked to a lot of sources on this. We've looked for any examples or any signs of a handshake deal that was made. Ultimately, what convinced Democrats, to save Mike Johnson was the fact that Mike Johnson followed through with certain promises, like funding the government on the basis of that bipartisan deal, like putting Ukraine aid on the floor, which was a very difficult thing for him to do. He went up against the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing and in many cases the MAGA wing of his party and did that vote. He also did the FISA vote against a coalition of right wing and some progressive members who wanted changes to the surveillance law. So what Democratic leaders saw was a speaker that was essentially giving them the bipartisan votes that they wanted. And to look at that and say, from now until the rest of the year, there's not a whole lot of must-pass bills that have to be done. There's FAA reauthorization, and everyone thinks government funding and the Farm Bill are probably getting punted until after the election. This is the last train leaving the station, and that's where Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't really have any leverage to push her demands. She made a series of demands, Chris, that didn't exactly add up, including, by the way, the Hastert rule. Yes, they are still calling it that, the majority of the majority principle, which she didn't have anywhere close to a majority of the majority for this vote, which a number of her colleagues noted as well.
I'm not going to get into who the Hastert rule is named after, but you should Google it. The Donald Trump's weighing in on this was hilarious because everyone, of course, says they have his Marjorie Taylor Greene on fighting for Trump. Trump waited until after the vote had happened. After it happened, and then said, vote to motion to table after a lot of gobbledygook, which was just so funny because what it says to me is that, honestly, the MAGA party doesn't care that much about the actual guts of spending legislation. On the whole, Donald Trump doesn't care that much. They take their cues from him. It's not the same kind of austerity party that it once was. They just can't get that amped up about it.
Yeah, candidly, Chris, Trump made himself irrelevant to this, motion to vacate drama. This began about 6 weeks ago when Marjorie Taylor Greene first wrote this out on a piece of paper, kind of dangled it in front of Mike Johnson, said, don't do Ukraine aid, don't do Ukraine aid. And Mike Johnson called her bluff and said, I'm doing Ukraine aid, come after me if you want. And Trump never weighed in a firm, direct way. Trump is very clear when he wants to be, when he really cares about a certain outcome, like killing that bipartisan border deal. He makes it abundantly clear that Republicans need to do this or there will be consequences. He didn't do anything like that when it comes to Mike Johnson and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Johnson went to Mar-a-Lago, did that pilgrimage some weeks ago, and Trump stood with him and praised him. He praised her as well. But there was never a very clear indication from Trump as to which way to go, which is why Republicans voted as they pleased.
Sahil Kapoor, thank you very much.